I was never supposed to see it. The tiny capsule slipping from my husband's palm into my glass. The world thought we were perfect, the couple with everything. The mansion, the money, the flawless Instagram smiles. But in that glittering moment, under the chandeliers and polite laughter, I realized the man I trusted was about to erase me. He leaned close, whispered sweetly, and lifted his own glass as if to toast. I smiled back, steady, even as my pulse hammered. He thought I was blind. He thought I was naive. But I had already decided he would drink first. People believed I lived a charmed life. They looked at our photographs online, sunlit vacations in Santorini, candlelit anniversaries in New York, and envied the perfect smiles we wore for the camera. I used to believe it too, at least for a while. Daniel had built a reputation as a brilliant entrepreneur, the kind of man magazines described as reshaping the future of artificial intelligence. He was 38, confident, charismatic, always shaking hands with investors and speaking at conferences where lights and applause painted him as untouchable. And I was the wife at his side, polished, supportive, always ready with the perfect smile. A trophy, they called me. Behind closed doors, though never to my face. I let myself be flattered by the illusion, because illusions are easier to live in than silence. His family, especially his mother, adored the spectacle more than the marriage itself. She often placed a hand on my shoulder at public events and whispered compliments that carried the sting of knives. "You make such a beautiful accessory, Claire. Daniel has impeccable taste." I would laugh lightly, as if she had given me a gift instead of stripping away my dignity. The mask began to slip one quiet afternoon when I was scrolling through my phone. A video appeared on my feed, an edited clip of me twisted into something grotesque. My face, my voice, yet the words weren't mine. The video showed me shouting obscenities, threatening violence, slurring as if drunk. It was a deep fake, expertly crafted, uploaded to look like a hidden recording. My stomach turned to ice. I had never said those things, but the illusion was convincing enough to fool anyone who wanted to believe it. I confronted Daniel that evening, my voice trembling as I held up the screen. He brushed it off with a dismissive laugh. "Claire, you worry too much. People make things up all the time on the internet. Ignore it." His eyes, however, didn't match his voice. They darted away, restless, calculating. That was when the seed of suspicion took root. The following week, I discovered why his eyes couldn't meet mine. Late one night, while walking through the hallway of his family's estate, I heard voices seeping through the crack of his mother's study door. I stopped. It was Daniel's voice, low and agitated, paired with his mother's sharp, cutting tones. "She's not going to last if this spreads," his mother said. "It has to spread," Daniel replied. "Her reputation is the leverage. Once she's ruined publicly, she can't fight back. We'll handle the rest quietly." My pulse pounded in my ears. They weren't discussing a stranger, they were plotting against me. The deepfake hadn't been random cruelty from the internet. It had been orchestrated by my husband, by his mother. I leaned against the wall, fighting to stay upright as the truth sank in. The empire of love and respect I had built my life upon was nothing more than a stage set. Behind the curtains, I was the mark in a con game. I tried to piece the puzzle together in the days that followed. The finances, the trips that Daniel claimed were business emergencies. The late-night phone calls he silenced as soon as I entered the room. When I dug deeper, I found fragments of documents, glimpses of accounts I had never known existed. The AI startup that supposedly made him rich was drowning. Millions in debt. Investors circling like sharks. My perfect husband wasn't building a future. He was clawing to survive. It was then I realized the marriage had never been about love. To him, I was an investment, useful for appearances, expendable when the mask cracked. I thought I had prepared myself for betrayal, but nothing could brace me for the moment it became undeniable. At a grand dinner party under chandeliers that glittered like stars, I caught the movement out of the corner of my eye. Daniel, standing near the polished oak table, palming something small between his fingers. His hand hovered over my wine glass, subtle, practiced. A capsule slipped in with the ease of someone who had rehearsed. The room was full of laughter and the clink of cutlery, but in that instant the sound dissolved into a deafening silence. The air grew thick, pressing against my skin. My heart thrashed against my ribs. He straightened, lifted his own glass, and turned toward me with that practiced smile the world adored. "To us," he said softly, as if the toast were meant only for me. I raised my glass, steady, though inside I felt myself shattering. Every guest at that table saw a woman gazing lovingly at her husband. None of them saw the truth, that he had just offered me death disguised as devotion. And for the first time I understood. I was not just fighting for dignity. I was fighting for survival. I lifted the glass with a smile that looked effortless, but felt carved into my skin. Daniel's eyes watched me too closely, too confidently. That was his mistake. Confidence always leaves room for carelessness. As I turned to acknowledge a guest's joke, I brushed my glass against his mother's with a subtle shift. No one noticed the exchange. When I brought mine to my lips, it was her drink I raised instead. She lifted mine, proud and smug, and took a sip. The laughter around the table swelled, drowning the sound of my heartbeat. I had prepared myself to taste the bitterness of poison, yet nothing touched my tongue. Instead, I watched her eyes widen, her fingers twitch against the stem of the glass. For one fleeting second, her smile faltered, then her body sagged forward. Crystal shattered as the glass slipped from her hand and splintered against the floor. The room gasped as one. Chairs scraped, silver cutlery clattered. I sat frozen, staring at the woman who had once whispered venom in my ear and now convulsed under the chandeliers. Daniel leapt from his seat, knocking over his own wine in a show of alarm. "Call an ambulance!" he shouted, the perfect image of a panicked son. His gaze flicked toward me for just an instant, sharp as a blade. Then came the whispers, multiplying around the table like a spreading fire. Claire's glass. Claire's drink. I knew the script he wanted to write for me, and he delivered his line flawlessly. "She wasn't feeling well earlier," Daniel said, his voice thick with concern. "I told her Claire might have slipped something by accident. She's been unstable lately." It landed exactly where he wanted, gaslighting, turning doubt into evidence. The faces around me shifted, confusion hardening into suspicion. I forced a tremor into my voice. "That's not true." But the guests weren't listening to me. They were watching a performance. Daniel placed a protective arm around me, as though shielding me from my own delusion. "She's been under so much stress," he whispered for the table to hear. "Please don't judge her." I wanted to scream, to shake them into seeing, but anger would only tighten the trap. So I lowered my head and let my hands tremble, as if his version of me, fragile, overwhelmed, were real. They saw weakness. What I felt was fire. Hours later, the hospital reported his mother would survive. The poison had been diluted, the dose not quite lethal, but the damage had been done. My name was already circling in hushed conversations, each retelling bending closer to guilt. Daniel came to me in the bedroom that night, his mask of concern stripped away. "You see how easy it is?" he whispered, standing in the shadows. "They already believe you. Next time, it won't just be suspicion." I lay still in the bed, feigning fear, though my pulse was steady. He thought he was writing my ending. He didn't know I had already begun rewriting his. Weeks before, when the first cracks appeared in our marriage, I had installed a discreet system in the house. Cameras linked to an AI program, trained to record every irregular movement, every object passed from one hand to another. At first, it was a precaution, a way to prove my sanity if Daniel's manipulation grew bolder. Now it was my arsenal. The next day, when the mansion emptied for meetings and errands, I locked the bedroom door, drew the curtains, and opened my laptop. The interface lit up, folders neatly labeled by date and room. I scrolled to last night's dinner. The dining room camera flickered to life. There he was, Daniel, leaning over my glass, slipping the capsule inside with the precision of habit. The video was clear, undeniable. My breath caught in my chest. For a moment, I imagined marching into the nearest police station, handing over the file, watching his empire collapse in a single instant. My finger hovered over the play button, ready to watch again, ready to make sure I wasn't dreaming. And then the screen stuttered. The file blinked. The cursor froze. One by one, the folders dissolved before my eyes, vanishing as if pulled from the inside. My AI system wasn't failing, it was being hacked. I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse hammering. He knew. Somehow Daniel had discovered my hidden weapon, and he was stripping it from me before I could strike. But what he didn't know, what he could never imagine, was that I had anticipated even this. The morning after the files vanished, the headlines began. It started with a single article. Anonymous sources claiming I had a history of erratic behavior. Within hours, it was everywhere. Blogs, gossip columns, even so-called serious outlets. They called me volatile, unstable, a danger to herself and others. By evening, my face was plastered across news broadcasts, framed by words like suspect wife and domestic poison plot, cancel culture feeds on blood, and I was the perfect offering. A beautiful wife accused of trying to poison her wealthy mother-in-law. It was too sensational to ignore. Strangers dissected my life as if it were their sport. Old photographs became evidence. My tired eyes proof of guilt. My silence interpreted as madness. Daniel played his part flawlessly. He appeared at press conferences in a tailored suit, voice breaking just enough to seem authentic. "My wife has been under so much stress," he said, his hand pressed to his chest. "I only pray she finds the help she needs." He was no longer the husband of a suspected criminal. He was the grieving hero, the victim of a woman spiraling out of control. I wanted to scream, but my voice was drowned in the roar of public judgment. When the police came to the house, I wasn't surprised. They questioned me in a small room that smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. They asked if I had ever felt violent impulses, if I had ever blacked out, if I had ever seen a doctor about hallucinations. No, I answered again and again, but their eyes carried doubt, as if my denials were rehearsed lies. By the time they let me go, the seed was already planted. Claire Matthews, unstable wife. I returned to the mansion and the walls felt tighter than before. Every corner seemed to whisper betrayal. That night, unable to sleep, I searched through Daniel's study, careful not to disturb the order of his papers. It was there. I found the proof. Sealed envelopes with medical insignia, stamped reports claiming I had been treated for paranoid delusions years earlier. My name, my date of birth, my supposed diagnosis. They were forgeries, but detailed enough to destroy me. A doctor's signature adorned the bottom, looping elegantly in black ink. My stomach twisted when I recognized the name. It was the same physician Daniel had insisted I see once, years ago, after a fainting spell. He'd been preparing this narrative long before the poison ever touched my glass. As I turned the papers over in my trembling hands, I noticed another folder tucked deeper into the drawer. Inside, insurance documents lay crisp and heavy. My breath caught when I read the details. A life insurance policy in my name worth $5 million. The beneficiary wasn't Daniel. It was his mother. My knees weakened, and I gripped the desk to keep from falling. The truth was no longer just betrayal. It was architecture, a blueprint. They hadn't been improvising. They had built a system designed to erase me and profit from my absence. I wanted to run, to vanish before they could strike again. But when I reached for my phone, the screen was dead, frozen, unresponsive. I tried the landline, no dial tone. My laptop no longer connected to the internet. A chill ran down my spine as I realized this wasn't a glitch. It was deliberate. I rushed to the front door, twisting the handle. It wouldn't budge. The locks had been replaced. The windows had been reinforced with new mechanisms I hadn't noticed before. The mansion that once stood as a fortress of wealth and prestige had transformed into a prison. I was trapped. My money, my accounts, my voice, all severed. Every connection I once had to the outside world was cut. Daniel had written me out of my own life, and now he was erasing me from the world itself. The mansion had become a cage, but cages are not impenetrable if you learn their rhythm. Every staff member had been dismissed, replaced with private guards Daniel called security. They shadowed me, silent and cold, yet they underestimated me. They believed the wife everyone thought hysterical had no claws left. Late one night, when the guards changed shifts and silence wrapped the halls, I slipped into the library where Daniel had carelessly left his laptop open. The machine was locked, but I didn't need access. Hidden in the spine of an old book was a business card, one I had kept for years. It belonged to a man named Aiden Kane, a former investor Daniel had ruined with false promises of groundbreaking technology. Aiden had disappeared into the underground afterward, but I had tracked whispers about him. He was a hacker now, a ghost in the system. I smuggled the card into my pocket and waited. The next morning, during a supervised trip to the garden, I pretended to admire the roses while my guard looked away. With the burner phone I had hidden in the soil weeks earlier, I dialed the number etched on the card. He answered on the second ring. "You shouldn't be calling me, Mrs. Matthews," he said. His voice was edged with suspicion. "I need proof," I whispered, "and you need revenge." That silence was longer, heavier. Then he chuckled softly. "Tell me everything." Within days, we had a plan. Using fragments of backups I had secretly copied from the AI surveillance system, Aiden began reconstructing files Daniel thought he had erased forever. I sat in my locked room at night, listening to his voice through a secure line, guiding me to hidden caches and corrupted drives. It felt like dragging bones out of a graveyard. Then one evening, Aiden's voice broke into a harsh whisper. "Claire, you need to see this." The video flickered alive on my screen. It was the dining room again. The night of the attempted poisoning, crystal clear. Daniel leaned over my glass, the capsule slipping into the wine like a drop of ink. His mother's face hovered just behind him, her lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. But the footage didn't end there. Aiden had pieced together another file, older, grainier. It showed a study, a desk, a man slumped forward, gasping for breath. Daniel stood nearby, watching. His mother placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. The man collapsing in the chair was Daniel's father, alive then, dying before my eyes. My breath caught. "They killed him," I whispered. "They staged it as a heart attack," Aiden said, "but this file proves otherwise. They've been at this longer than you think." The weight of the revelation pressed me into my chair. Everything I thought I knew about this family was only the surface of a rot that ran generations deep. "Claire," Aiden said carefully, "Daniel isn't the biggest danger here. There's someone higher, someone pulling strings. Your husband and his mother were pawns in something larger." His words clawed at me. I wanted to demand answers, but the line clicked off. He'd vanished again, leaving me with truth and terror in equal measure. The next morning, I stepped into Daniel's study with renewed clarity. If I was going to survive, I couldn't simply defend myself. I had to strike first. I began by leaking fragments of financial documents. Through anonymous channels, I fed the press evidence of hidden debts, offshore accounts, falsified contracts. Within 48 hours, whispers became roars. Headlines screamed about corporate fraud. Investors panicked. The company Daniel claimed as his triumph plummeted in value. The Matthews estate turned into a war zone. I could hear them through the walls. Daniel shouting, his mother crying, both accusing each other of betrayal. The empire they built on deceit was crumbling, and they were too blinded by self-preservation to see the hand guiding it. But destruction wasn't enough. The world needed to see their faces for what they truly were. I set up cameras in my locked room, adjusted the lighting, and stared into the lens. For the first time, I wasn't wearing the mask of a dutiful wife. I was raw, resolute. "My name is Claire Matthews," I rehearsed, "and this is the truth they never wanted you to hear." The live stream would be my confession and my weapon, a blade honed not on lies, but on evidence. When I hit broadcast, the world would hear every detail: the poison, the fraud, the murder of Daniel's father. There would be no turning back. The evening of the stream, I felt an eerie calm. I checked the connection twice, then 3 times. Aiden sent a single message: "They won't be able to stop it if you start." I sat before the camera, fingers trembling, and pressed "Go live." The red light blinked on. I opened my mouth, drew breath, and the screen went black. A figure stepped into the frame, not Daniel, not his mother. It was Richard Matthews, Daniel's father, the man I had believed dead, the man I had watched die in that video. His face was older, sharper, untouched by illness. His voice was low but carried the weight of command. "Claire," he said, his eyes locking with mine, "you think you've uncovered the truth, but every move, every revelation was written in advance. I'm not the victim. I am not dead. I am the author of this story." The camera cut. The live stream severed before I could speak. I sat in the sudden dark, the silence deafening. My blood turned cold as the realization struck. Everything I had fought against, Daniel, his mother, the company, was only the surface. The real game had just begun. Richard's words echoed long after the screen went dark. "I am the author of this story." Everything I thought I had exposed was just another act in his theater. Daniel, his mother, even the poisoned glass, puppets in a play I hadn't realized I'd been drafted into. Days later, the authorities finally moved against Daniel. The evidence I had leaked, combined with what little remained of Aiden's recovered files, was enough to trigger an investigation. Daniel was arrested on charges of fraud, attempted murder, and obstruction. His mother, weakened from the poison and frantic to save herself, testified against him. For a fleeting moment, it felt like victory. But victories in this family always came with blood on the edges. The trial drew headlines around the world. Outside the courthouse, crowds chanted my name, some praising me as the woman who dared expose the rot of the wealthy elite. Others jeered, waving posters painted with my face beside the words, "Black Widow." They claimed I was no victim at all, that I had orchestrated everything, that I had manipulated the story to seize power. The same public that had once condemned me as unstable now split itself in two, each side tearing at the version of me it preferred. Inside the courtroom, I held my head high, but every camera flash felt like a blade. I had won the legal battle, but I was losing something else: my identity, my control over who I was. To the world, I had become a symbol, and symbols are easier to destroy than people. After Daniel was sentenced, I returned to the mansion that had once been my prison. The halls were quieter now, emptier, but the silence didn't comfort me. It threatened me. Aiden, my one ally, had promised to deliver more files, more proof of Richard's schemes. But then his messages stopped. Calls went unanswered. One night, as I searched for him online, a single encrypted message appeared on my laptop. "We have him. He should not have interfered. No signature. No demand. Just a statement." My hands trembled as I read it again and again. They had taken him, and I didn't need to guess who they were. Richard had made his move. The next morning, financial news erupted with chaos. Billions of dollars had been siphoned from the Matthews empire into offshore accounts. Daniel's downfall had created panic, but the collapse was deliberate. Richard had orchestrated a controlled implosion, pulling the fortune into safe havens while the rest of the family tore each other apart. His son was in prison, his wife disgraced, and yet Richard stood untouched, invisible, the true master of the game. It was then, digging through old family documents hidden in the estate, that I found the twist Richard hadn't intended me to see. A will, the true will, unaltered, written years ago, before Daniel's father died. Richard hadn't eliminated me from the family's future. He had unwittingly bound me to it. My name was listed as primary heir, not Daniel, not his mother, me. I stared at the document until the letters blurred. Why me? Why would Richard leave his empire in my hands? Unless it had always been part of his plan. That evening, the answer came. I found Richard waiting in the study, alive, powerful, his presence filling the room like smoke. He regarded me with an almost paternal calm. "You've survived longer than I expected," he said. "Daniel lacked discipline. His mother lacked vision. But you see the game for what it is." I clenched the will in my hand. "You left it to me." He smiled faintly. "Of course I did. You're the only one ruthless enough to wield it properly. Everything until now has been a test, Claire, and you passed." My skin crawled, but I forced my voice steady. "You murdered your own son. You orchestrated every betrayal. For what? Power." "For continuity," he corrected. "Power is nothing if it dies with the weak. I offered Daniel the chance to prove himself. He failed. I offered you the same test. And here you stand." The weight of his words crushed against my chest. I had fought to expose corruption, to free myself from their grip, and now he was offering me the throne. He leaned closer, his voice almost gentle. "Join me, Claire. Together we can rebuild what the others destroyed, or refuse, and you'll share the fate of every other piece I've removed from the board." The air felt heavy, suffocating. I could hear the echo of his ultimatum in the stillness, join or perish, and for the first time since the poison touched my glass, I wasn't sure which choice would damn me more. I spent days replaying Richard's ultimatum in my mind. Join him and inherit an empire built on blood, or refuse and be erased like every other pawn before me. But Richard had underestimated something vital. I wasn't a pawn anymore. I had learned his game, and I was ready to break it. The first step was control. I gathered every piece of evidence Aiden and I had unearthed before his disappearance: financial records, hidden camera footage, even the video of Richard standing over his dead body years earlier. For weeks, I had feared losing my voice. Now I decided to amplify it until it became impossible to silence. On a storm-lashed evening, I sat once more before the camera, but this time there was no hesitation, no trembling hands. The system was fortified with layers of encryption Aiden had taught me to build. There would be no blackouts, no interference. I pressed Go Live, and the red light burned steady. "My name is Claire Matthews," I began, my voice clear, unflinching. "And this is the truth." Screens around the world lit up as my face appeared. I showed the footage of Daniel slipping poison into my glass, the financial files proving fraud, and the grainy video of Richard himself orchestrating the death of his own business partner, his own brother, years ago. Millions watched as I laid bare the legacy of betrayal that had defined the Matthews family. But the most powerful moment wasn't the documents or the videos. It was when I looked directly into the lens and said, "You have been the jury all along. Tonight I put the verdict in your hands." Within minutes, the stream went viral. Hashtags bearing my name flooded social media. Comment sections erupted with outrage and support. For once, I wasn't at the mercy of hidden judges behind closed doors. The world itself had become the courtroom, and I had turned the public into my shield. Richard tried to fight back. Statements appeared from anonymous accounts denouncing me as a liar, a manipulator, but the tide had shifted. The files were too detailed, too damning. International regulators froze assets tied to Richard's accounts. The fortress of secrecy he had built crumbled under the glare of collective judgment. And then, just as the walls closed in, Richard vanished. His private jet disappeared from radar over the Atlantic. Billions of dollars in offshore funds evaporated overnight, transferred into anonymous vaults no one could trace. By morning, all that remained of him was the echo of his threat and the chaos he left behind. For a long time, I didn't know if he was alive or dead. Sometimes I still don't. But his absence created a vacuum, and that vacuum was mine to fill. I could have walked away then. I could have taken the settlement, vanished into anonymity, rebuilt a quiet life. But silence is another kind of prison, and I had been caged long enough. If Richard had taught me anything, it was that power left, unused, is power wasted. So I began again, not with a company, not with a family name, but with an idea. I founded the Phoenix Fund, a global initiative for survivors of financial abuse, women and men who had been trapped in toxic marriages, manipulated, erased, stripped of independence. I poured the settlement money, the scraps of the Matthews fortune, into building it. For every headline that once called me a villain, I demanded new headlines that called me something else, a builder, a protector. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been branded a trophy wife, a black widow, a pawn. Now people whispered a new name, architect. At the first conference I hosted, I stood before a room of survivors, their faces a mirror of what mine once was. Fear, doubt, the faintest flicker of hope. I told them my story, not the polished version, but the raw one, about the poison, about the betrayal, about the choice to rise instead of crumble. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. Not the shallow applause of investors at Daniel's conferences, but the thunder of people who knew what it meant to claw their way out of fire. Months passed. The fund grew. My name shifted in the public eye, not entirely redeemed, but no longer defined by scandal. Yet I knew one truth remained. Richard might still be out there, watching, waiting, perhaps plotting a new chapter. And that was why, on the anniversary of my first live stream, I turned the camera on again. The light blinked red. I stared into it with steady eyes. No mask, no pretense. I was once told I could never escape the game, I said, that I had only two choices, to play by their rules or to be destroyed. They were wrong. I leaned closer, my voice a promise. I did not escape the game. I changed it. And from this moment on, I write the rules. I clicked the feed live, letting the words ripple into the world, into the homes of strangers, into the shadows where Richard might be hiding. The jury was listening again, but this time I wasn't on trial. This time I was the one holding the gavel.